Now, I also want to talk about the Prime Minister, who was in the Solomon Islands today, in and out for the day, on his way to the UK and those D-Day commemorations, where he will meet, among others, the UK Prime Minister Theresa May, and there'll be opportunities to meet plenty of other world leaders. Well, he brought a fistful of dollars with him, exactly what the Pacific Islands are being offered from China.
We have always been involved in infrastructure, and we continue to be very heavily committed to health and education. Heavily committed to health and education.
Now, Cory is a man who's been to the UN for 3 months and was a fun secondment. No, anyway, that's just a way into it here. Look, obviously Australia is the big daddy in this region. It is our responsibility to be the country that is always looking out for those that need aid. There's all of these obvious defence reasons why you need to take care of your neighbours here. I don't think that Scott Morrison can be dinged for being somebody who's just discovered this in the past couple of months. He's certainly, throughout his entirety of his prime ministership, been very clear and very early about the need to take on China and what China's trying to do here. But do you think he has to do a bit more than a fistful of dollars in and out in a day?
Probably, but look, he's made a pretty good start. I mean, paper bag diplomacy has been going on in the South Pacific for a very long time, and Australia has resisted it because we've tried to be the pure player. But the reality is we can't afford to neglect our own region, and if we're going to be investing in other nations, aren't we better doing it in nations that are on our doorstep, that are desperately in need of help, rather than letting a frenemy, if I can put it like that, or someone who has aspirations which are not always in Australia's interest from doing it. So I'm not going to knock him for it, but I think it's going to take a concerted effort over a long period of time to counter the influence that's been established there by China and other players.
Well, it's a good point that Cory makes about a frenemy, and I think an example of that clearly is Indonesia, where Indonesia at one point in time has had most recent presidents saying they want a military bigger than Australia's. They want the ability to be a more forceful power than a place like Australia. Of course, I support the idea of aid going to Indonesia because, as we saw, when there isn't social welfare infrastructure, JI can roll in, build a school, build radicalisation, and eventually can breed a whole series of terror plots that you, of course, then have to push back against. That's the upside of helping someone like in Indonesia. Conversely, there's an awful lot of corruption and other things that are there. But what's your view for all? I mean, you will never win a vote in Australia talking about foreign aid. But if you are going to win one, I think being able to say these island nations are our part of the world.
Look, we're spending $50 billion on a handful of submarines to protect our seas. It's not going to matter one iota if the Chinese keep building ports and take over these islands. It's ridiculous. We've got the wrong way. Soft power, this is money well spent. Australian governments have successively taken the Pacific for granted. It's in our backyard. We'll be fine. We've come late to the party on this threat. We're doing the right thing now. And you have to, because unfortunately our Pacific engagement in recent years has been dominated by Manus and Nauru and detention centres and the behaviour of that. There's a lot more to the Pacific, and we need to act.
What do you think, Richo, about also that there are many of these islands that turn around, and I believe the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands said on the weekend, climate change, that's our main focus. We're the ones that are actually going to be fastest impacted by this. Prime Minister's not going to budge on, we're signing Paris, that's it. And look, you can't expect an awful lot more when the President of the United States won't sign anything and China can keep doing whatever the heck it wants till 2030.
Well, Kiribati is a great example. They're basically just a little bit of sand just above the ocean. Just above.
Water lapping a government house.
You don't really need climate change. Every year a big tide covers most of them. So that they've got that's a parlous existence. And you can understand the way that they feel about these things. I mean, you can talk about, the climate change deniers can talk all they like. Go to Kiribati and they'll laugh at you.